Welcome to the Cyber Insider, Emsisoft's podcast all about cybersecurity. Your hosts today are Brett Callow, threat analyst here at Emsisoft, and I'm Luke Connolly, partner manager. We're very excited to have the opportunity to speak with today's guest, Ryan Weeks. As the former Chief Information Security Officer for Datto, Ryan built and piloted Datto's industry-leading information security program prior to the 2023 acquisition of the company. Currently, he's advising IT channel cybersecurity startups and is the partner and director of content for Right of Boom, a cybersecurity education company purposely built for MSPs. Ryan enjoys sharing his knowledge and experiences of all things cybersecurity almost as much as he loves his family, fishing, and surfing. Ryan, you've earned an outstanding reputation in the cybersecurity industry, and I provided a bit of a bare bones background, but perhaps you can add a little meat to that for us.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, I was at Datto for 6 years, and my time there, the story actually starts a little bit before there. I started in financial services and fintech. So that was around the time that we were going up against, kind of the banking Trojans, and then like the initial wave of ransomware. And then I moved over into Datto, which is an MSP specific security company. Started building out a security program there, and then within a year, MSPs, a lot of those ransomware operators shifted focus to MSPs. So I've had this career where I find myself constantly, working cybersecurity in a threat landscape where our customers are our targets, and it's been a very interesting career, and I've been privileged to build some really amazing teams and frankly deliver some security programs that are amongst the top in the world. So it's been a wild ride. But I really do love sharing my knowledge and experience with MSPs and really anybody that'll listen, as my wife would tell you. But yeah, so it's been an interesting career, and been really blessed to find a home here in the IT channel with MSPs. So definitely looking forward to continuing to help more and more MSPs build more cyber resilient security programs and build successful businesses. So that's frankly what we're all about at Right of Boom too. So it's been a kind of another very interesting facet of my career that is playing out right now. And the advising for IT security startups is a lot of fun too, right? There's a lot of people out there trying to solve some difficult problems in really innovative ways, and it's fun to get to see how people want to solve some of these problems and collaborate with them to do that. So it's definitely a privileged position, and I'm really grateful.
Well, the benefits of people who may not have heard about Rise of Boom, can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, Right of Boom is it's a company that was founded by our founder Andrew Morgan. Him and I have been working together for years. We do something called the Cyber Call. We did the Cyber Call together for a while. I still come on as a guest and guest host every once in a while. That's a free weekly webinar for MSPs around cybersecurity. Then we started doing a podcast during the pandemic called the Cybercast. It's all around the CIS controls, but with MSP specific guidance on the controls. And we actually have the director of CIS controls, or I don't know what her official title is now, but I think it's much stronger than that, but Phyllis Lee. And Andrew kind of came to me a while back. I was like, hey, I want to do a conference. I think there's a gap here for vendor agnostic training. And I was like, cool, let's do it, but in a different way than most cybersecurity companies do it. Let's have let's really make the learning journey specific to MSPs, and let's structure it in a way that really helps the MSPs understand the full spectrum of capabilities they need, from left to Right of Boom. And so Right of Boom was born as a cybersecurity learning and events company. and we're going into our third year. So we're excited to put on another conference next year at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, which I'm laughing because this year, 2023, our conference centered around the Black Hat ransomware operator group, which happens to be the group and one of their affiliates, one of their very advanced affiliates that just popped the MGM. So it's an ironic set of circumstances, but fun nonetheless. So yeah, we're really looking forward to this year and meeting with more MSPs and continuing the success that we've had in the past few years.
Again, just for the benefit of people who may not know, left of boom, rise of boom, what are they?
Yeah, it comes from the military. It really is a framework for thinking about how you prepare for and how you respond to kinetic attacks. But the cybersecurity industry has adopted it as a way of talking about the things you do to prepare for an attack, which is the left of boom stuff, and the things you do once you realize you've been attacked to respond and recover from boom. And so there's a lot of different frameworks that complement this idea of left and right of boom. And our whole conference actually has a whole framework sandwich that we use to kind of help with that structured learning journey to really help MSPs make sense of how to build a really resilient cybersecurity program, rather than kind of picking the vendor of the day that promises 100% protection, which isn't a real strategy for resilience. So that's left and right of boom in a nutshell.
How has the risk landscape changed for MSPs in recent years?
I mean, it completely got turned upside down on its head in 2018-ish. That was really when there was a large spate of attacks really against MSPs. Probably the biggest one that most people know of was WePro, which is kind of your 1% of your 1% breaches. That they're an MSP, a technology solutions provider. But that year there was also a series of attacks in kind of the southeastern United States. Those all actually originated through MSPs. So much so that a term got coined by a cybersecurity company in the space called the Buffalo Jump, which is actually the naming of an attack against a SMB customer that originates from the compromise of an MSP. So the risk landscape is complicated now, especially depending on the ecosystem that the MSPs service the industries. So, MSPs that service sectors that are commonly targeted: financial, legal, manufacturing, defense industrial base. Obviously, a lot of those MSPs are under kind of higher risk just because they inherit the threat profile of their customers. And it's one of the things we've been working to educate them on through the cyber call and to write a boom is you really need to understand your adversary. We adopt the MITRE mentality of threat-informed cyber defense, right? You can't really have an effective cyber defense if you don't have some semblance of an understanding of your adversary and how they might seek to compromise your, what we call tradecraft or TTPs. And so a lot of what we do is helping MSPs understand the threat landscape and figuring out how to apply that to their businesses as customer zero, how that should translate into services they offer to their customers, which is commonly the SMB or the SLTT, which is a state, local, tribal territory, and do that in a way that kind of protects the MSP's downside risk and also hopefully creates a profitable business for them. I like to say that MSPs are very lucky in that they are, while they're being targeted, they're one of the only industries that can use that knowledge and information they're gaining from combating that threat to turn it into profit revenue streams by selling more comprehensive and protective services into their end customers. So it's actually a business enabler for them, where most people view cybersecurity as a cost center. It's a very unique kind of situation they find themselves in because, again, it's not just the MSPs that are under attack; it's their SMB customers, right? The Verizon data breach report this year said there's really no differentiation between the attacks that are being seen against SMBs and large enterprises. Granted, their definition of what an SMB is still fairly large by most standards. It's less than 1,000 employees. Most MSPs are servicing businesses much smaller than that, but at the end of the day, SMBs are a prime target, often because they have tighter budgets, and they might not have the same capability to respond to an attack, so they're at a disadvantage, and that creates an advantage for MSPs. So it's a double-edged sword. It's it's both a blessing and a curse for MSPs that the industry has kind of come under some scrutiny, and that there are some ransomware affiliates that focus specifically on MSPs, the viable business model. So it's an interesting time out there, and I think that speaks to the need for help, decision support, coaching, learning, just a community to really help MSPs mature their businesses and their cybersecurity programs.
Do MSPs face any unique security challenges, or are they really just in the same boat as everybody else?
They do. I mean, I think one of the things that is maybe a disadvantage for MSPs is their business model. Disadvantage for MSPs is their business model. And what I mean by that is they're providing IT services to many, many, many companies, right? So when I built the cybersecurity program in my FinTech days or Datto, I was protecting primarily Datto. And then I was, through our products, concerned about protecting our customers. But I was really focusing on one entity. MSPs do not have the luxury of focusing on building a cybersecurity program that's specific to one entity. And so a lot of the technology they have to use, you think of it almost like a multi-tenant situation. They have to provide a level of service to end customers. And the technology that they use is thus different than what most large enterprises would use. And that technology historically has not had the same level of robustness or cybersecurity associated with it. And so that creates an issue for them from a supply chain perspective. And then to add insult to injury, right, a lot of these tools that they use, because they need to be able to remotely access and manage customers from a central location for economies of scale to make their business work, those tools are then being used by threat actors as kind of built-in command and control. So those remote access solutions, the RMM platforms, those can be really dangerous in the hands of a threat actor. And so I think there are some unique challenges for MSPs, but I don't think that those challenges are kind of so substantial as to be, a complete roadblock or a standstill for the MSP. I think all of those things can be overcome. They just require some additional diligence in threat modeling, in continuous configuration, maintenance and management, and frankly, in attack surface management too. A lot of the MSP grade network appliances that are used are frequently being vulnerabilities are frequently being leveraged to compromise SMB customers or MSPs that have certain services enabled or certain protocols open to the internet. So they have some unique challenges because of their business model, but I don't think that it's so substantial that it's a losing battle. I think it just requires an extra level of diligence, and most MSPs are adapting to that. I think, but again, there's a need for some additional help and guidance, and that's where there's a really special thing about the MSP space and the IT channel. It really is a community, and and I haven't really experienced that anywhere else. So it's pretty amazing that when the industry came under attack, there was some confusion initially with some naming and shaming between vendors and MSPs, but eventually I think there was kind of a reckoning where everybody kind of took some level of accountability of what was going on in the space, and there has kind of become this idea that we're collectively starting to fight back and increase the minimum standard of what it means to be an MSP to include, at least a baseline or essential level of cybersecurity.
If we step back from MSPs for a moment, do you have any advice for the owners of small and medium businesses that handle their own cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's actually advice for MSPs and SMBs. There's a thing we do in larger enterprises, which is typically called a quarterly business review, and that's a time where we sit down and we look at how the business is operating, is it healthy, and any sort of strategic issues that are facing us that we might need to put together some plans to address. And I think more MSPs can leverage this idea of a QBR, one, to be reiterating the value of the service they're providing to SMBs, but also to use it as a vehicle to educate them on what's going on in the cybersecurity landscape, how their technology solutions and their services offerings are helping to combat that, and why there might be a need for them to deploy additional tools or services into that customer. And really, it should be a risk conversation, and the risk conversation should be in the context of the business. You're in this industry, you have this type of data, this is highly valuable, these threat actors would love to get a hold of this. Because of that, we need to protect against these types of things. Your likely loss from an attack could be X. Having a conversation around what the impact is to their business. So I think SMBs that are kind of going it alone are going to have a difficult time kind of understanding the threat landscape and applying it to their business and having those risk conversations. But SMBs that have an MSP, I think it might be worthwhile for you to get with your MSP and ask for a quarterly business review and review the state of your cybersecurity program as delivered by the MSP and how it's protecting you relative to the threats that you as an SMB face because of your various different attributes that may make you more or less likely to be targeted.
Cybersecurity isn't only about the technology stack.
Certainly not.
It's also about people and process. What should organizations be thinking about in terms of that overall cyber resilience?
Yeah, so at Rate of Boom, we label this capabilities. Your cybersecurity program is going to need capabilities. You need to be capable of detecting attack. You need to be capable of responding to an attack and containing it. You need to be capable of recovering from an attack. Capabilities require people, process, and technology. You cannot have cyber resilience or even really an effectively operating cybersecurity program if you only have one or even two of those. You really need three. You need, the way I like to describe it to people is whenever I identify a need for some sort of maturity in a cybersecurity program, one of the things I do is first look at my people. Do I have people that are capable of coming up and dedicating time to focusing on this issue and advancing it? From there, those people are ultimately going to build process, and they may need technology solutions to help them achieve that goal, but it all starts with people. So when you're looking at your cybersecurity program, really the first thing you want to assess is your people. Do we have people, and whether that's your people as in your in-house IT staff, or whether it's the capabilities of your MSP, you generally want to understand, what level of service are the people able to provide me, and is that commensurate with my risk? So I don't know if I answered the question fully, but I think that's one way. I tend to think about it, and we tend to communicate it to MSPs at Right at Boom.
What security threats do businesses tend not to prioritize as much as they should?
I mean, I think the flavor du jour is social engineering attacks. I mean, BEC attacks are huge against SMBs. I mean, the net proceeds of BEC attacks and ransomware alone are more than all of the rest of cybercrime. So I think you really got to look at, and now we're seeing, you had the Lapsus group, which is largely targeting high-tech companies, but now you see those tactics being used by ransomware affiliates, a la the MGM attack. So like, I think more care needs to be placed in, I have a really difficult time with the terminology in the space with educating users around cybersecurity related matters. We tend to call that training in cybersecurity, which I really don't like that term, because it implies like you train you train your pet, right? You train an AI model. You train, right? This is education. These people need to learn. And there needs to be behavior modification, right? That comes with that. So I think as a whole, we need to rethink social engineering education for end users, especially end users with high levels of privilege or network access. If you want to take a risk-adjusted approach to social engineering protection, you got to start with the people that have the most access and the most privilege that could do the most damage. But I think that's an area that we need to focus a lot more on. And we can use technology solutions like phishing our users 17 times a day, but at the end of the day, your click rate's still not zero. And so that area is also rapidly evolving. A la last year's Verizon Data Breach Report, your standard phishing emails were more common than your pre-texting emails. A phishing email generally includes a malicious attachment or a link. A pre-texting email doesn't really contain that. It's a plausible scenario created by a persona that is meant to dupe the user into doing something, typically financial fraud, taking an action that they wouldn't otherwise take. This year in the Verizon Data Breach Report, pre-texting actually overtook phishing as the number one kind of mechanism inside of social engineering. And that means we're really dealing with an evolution in the tactics used for social engineering, and with the success that we've seen. Even though the Lapsus attacks against high tech might not be directly applicable to SMBs and MSPs, when we see a threat actor have a high level of success with the tactic, generally within 6 to 9 months, we see that tactic becoming widely adopted within the broader threat actor community. And we're seeing that now as it comes down to ransomware affiliates. Not that it's new, but I think there's increased importance on educating and protecting against those types of attacks. And frankly, that's people, educating people, and process, making sure you have the right processes in place to prevent a user that does wind up getting social engineered from being able to cause a substantial amount of harm. So checks and balances, dual control, things like that are definitely helpful. And I think I've implemented those in help desks in the past for dangerous actions to try and do things like that. I think it's an opportunity for us all to kind of take a sober look at our defenses against social engineering and spend some time there. And it's a great time to have that conversation because October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? So what better topic than to talk about social engineering and how technology is not going to save us. It's the best computers know the man, which are the brains inside of our end user sides. We just have to educate them.
Indeed, and an interesting point on that is the post-incident, you often see organizations replacing their technology, replacing whichever solutions allowed the attacks to succeed. You less frequently see them talking about implementing new processes or bolstering their people levels.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, software as a service architectures are often seen as being more secure than their on-premises alternatives. But we have seen a run of attacks against such architectures recently. Are they really more secure?
There's this whole argument. I distinctly remember when cloud computing really started to become like mainstream. And it was the promise was the cloud's going to be so much more secure. And I'm like, as a cybersecurity practitioner, I just look at that and I'm like, that's just a different environment that I need to understand and wrap some reasonable protections around. I think this mentality that one type of architecture or delivery model for a service is more secure than another is absolutely ludicrous. And I think it's played out in the MSP space time and time again. We've seen compromises of MSPs due to on-premise software, and we've seen compromises of MSPs due to SaaS solutions. One is not more secure than the other. And furthermore, a lot of the SaaS security issues really, come from the entire software supply chain landscape of the entity, right? If you have a single solution that doesn't have a lot of integration, maybe that's slightly more secure than one that's connected to everything with the same API key that has admin level permissions, right? So you really have to look at your SaaS stack and you have to ask yourself, okay, well, because it's not on-prem, I need to really worry about identity and access management, and I need to worry about where users can connect to it from. I need to worry about network connectivity to and from that thing, and do I have any controls there? You really need to sit down and, again, this is where threat modeling is huge, using some open source tool like Threat Dragon from OWASP or something just to walk you through some sort of structured exercise. Again, you'd have to have some cybersecurity knowledge to do this, so it's probably more well suited for an MSP. But I don't buy into the SaaS as more or less secure. I do think overall the quality of software used by SMBs tends to be lower. And so I think there does need to be an increased level of scrutiny by MSPs on the application security and secure coding practices of their SaaS solutions or their vendors in general, because it doesn't matter whether it's on-premise monolithic software or SaaS solutions. What's getting you popped is the poor web application security posture of those solutions. And I think that's where the conversation needs to shift from, can you give me the results of your last pen test in SOC 2 to, I like the application security verification standard, ASVS, has 3 levels. Level 1 is entirely pen testable. There's 120 plus requirements in level 1. If you look at OWASP top 10 or SANS critical 20 or 25, whatever it is these days, you're looking at 10 to 12, X the amount of requirements. I really think when we're bringing on a vendor that's going to be a critical to our service delivery, to our solutions, could potentially impact, our susceptibility, our likelihood of getting breached. We really need to be having a more structured conversation around the quality of that software. And I think ASVS is an easy way for us to have a more robust conversation. And I've been saying for a while that I think, every single pen test that you get from your vendors should be scoped to ASVS level 1. That's going to be the level of essential application security that you really should rely on, because there's still people out there that sell a vulnerability scan as a pen test for $99. So we need to be more specific about what it is we're requiring, and asking your vendor to provide you the results of a pen test whose scope was scoped to ASVS level 1, with the appropriate amount of time to complete that assessment relative to the scope of the service is really what we should be doing to determine the security of a SaaS solution. Granted, there's other stuff that surrounds it, but I think that's one way we can advance the conversation. In general, I think third and fourth party supply chain risk is an area where there's still a lot of trouble. I think SBOM will help, but only insofar as there's some solution that automatically gathers all that information and then creates some sort of triage of the issues that you can then prioritize working with your vendors with. So it's a tough conversation, but I think going back to the base question, I do not think that SaaS is more secure than other solutions. I think it's really incumbent upon you to determine if it's secure enough and if you can wrap additional compensating controls around those solutions to make them safe for your business to operate.
One of the things, and I think we've talked around this a little bit, one of the things inherent in the name, Right of Boom, is the assumption that something bad will happen and that we should prepare for it.
Yep.
But for breaches, a stigma still exists with a lot of people, that someone did something wrong or that they didn't do something that they should have. Can you talk about the reality of cyber attacks and how they should be viewed?
Yeah, we are Right of Boom. We again have adopted many frameworks. We refer to this one more as a mindset, the assume breach mindset. The assume breach mindset says at some point you will suffer a cybersecurity incident. That incident may wind up being a breach. It may wind up being a nothing burger, depending on how robust your security program is at identifying and containing and managing that scenario. But you have to assume at some point that someone is going to get, beyond the castle moats and the castle walls and the battlements and all the other things that you put up, all your protections, and that you're going to need to have the ability to minimize damage and operate through adverse conditions, which is what cyber resilience is, right? That's the goal, is you want to, despite adverse conditions, continue to be able to operate your business in a way that doesn't have a detrimental impact or an existential impact on your business. So assume breach is pivotal. I think you talk to any CISO and that CISO is like, oh, we're never going to get breached. Probably need to find a new CISO, right? You want the guy that's planning for when you get breached. What's that going to look like? How are we going to respond? What are the full spectrum of capabilities that we needed? And frankly, if you're an SMB, you want to be having that conversation with your MSP because they're your CISO, they're your vCISO, right? So, in the event that there is a cyber attack, what services are you going to provide me? What services might I be missing? Whether that's a cyber warranty or cyber insurance, or maybe I need some PR help or some breach coaching or some digital forensics and incident response assistance, some ransomware negotiation assistance. Like there's a whole level of ecosystem of additional supporting services that you might need. And so I think you have to have that conversation and be real about the fact that at some point something bad is going to happen and you want your capabilities, there's that word again, your people, process, and technology to be robust enough to help you operate through it. So I think maybe I answered half your question. I'm not sure if I got the whole thing.
I was also going to, when you were speaking, I wanted to circle back to something that you said at the beginning of our talk, which was referring to the incidents that really started to attack MSPs in 2018. And there was an initial response, which was some of the victims. But I think it's much more productive. And I assume that you would agree that naming and shaming is not the right thing. We should be acknowledging that attacks can and will occur to everyone. And we should be working collectively as an industry, as an economy, to try to minimize the damage and maximize our defenses?
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, there's obviously efforts right now to create a unified cyber incident reporting portal for all businesses, et cetera. I think part of the problem is when you feel different or when you feel alone, there's a stigma attached to that. And because we don't really understand how prevalent some of these things are, like we can read reports like the FBI Crime Center IC3 report, or we can read the Verizon Breach report or the CISA 22 RVA. We can look at all these things and there's some data in there, but it's not real for us. And so we can feel isolated. We can feel like, if a breach happens to me, it means I'm bad in some way. I'm different than everyone else. But the reality is everybody is dealing with this in some shape or form. And it's dramatically underreported. And so we're actually more alike than we're different. And so a breach shouldn't be viewed as a bad thing. In fact, we should turn it, we should stop thinking about it as a stick and start thinking about it as a carrot. The breach isn't the bad thing, and it makes us bad if it happens to us. The breach is a thing that is going to happen, and it's the motivation for us to make ourselves better, so that when it happens, we're more prepared to operate through it. So I think that mindset shift is really important. To me, that's part of the assume breach mindset, but I think to your point, it's a little more nuanced part of that mindset that maybe we don't talk about enough, which is you will get breached, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do when you get breached that matters. So use the fact that a breach will happen to you at some point, as fuel rather than more fear.
You are, or at least were, on the multi-sector ransomware task force. Do you think that initiative has really made any headway in combating the ransomware problem?
I think it has led to some very important conversations that needed to happen from a policy perspective. I think the time horizon over which those things are going to play out is going to be a lot longer just because the speed of federal government. But I do continue to believe that the work we did there and the recommendations we put forward, and I know there are still folks working to progress a lot of those initiatives. There has been a lot of trickle-down positive effect from that. I think it probably needs to be reinvigorated. It needs more life. It needs more attention. It really needs some truly coordinated effort to really make the impact we want. I think a takedown here or there, or a new policy, or a new initiative by CISA is great, or a new initiative, for ISACs is great, or more information sharing is all great. But I think we still have a long ways to go. And I think this is, we talk about, it took a while for the MSP community to come together, but we're all people beating the same drum, right? At the federal government level, that's a whole different ballgame. You're trying to get, thousands of different communities to agree and move forward on something. I think that takes time. So has it had the impact I wanted it to have in the short term? No. But do I think there's still hope that the work that was done there continues to get carried on and builds upon? I think yes. I think it was also important because no one had tried before. Right? And, what's the saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Okay, well, we took a shot. Maybe some things landed and some things didn't, and we need to regroup, iterate, and take a new approach. But you got to get started, right? You can't finish if you don't get started. And so I think that was one of the biggest things to me was it was a true multi-sector collaborative effort to try and come up with some common sense, reasonable things to move the needle on cybercrime. And some things worked and some things didn't, and some things are still in progress. So I think success of that initiative is going to play out over many years, not over months. So I don't know that it's I haven't been asked that question before, so I don't know that I have a super crisp answer for that, but I think you can kind of surmise that I don't think it was a wasted effort, but I don't think it had the full impact that I was hoping for. But I don't think that that's reason to not continue to try.
I was watching an interview that you did from February of last year, 2022, and that was within days of Russia invading Ukraine. And at that point, there was a lot of speculation that we'd see the first all-out cyber war and that cyber threats would eventually spread beyond the conflict to the rest of the world. So I have a multifaceted question here. Number one, has that happened? If so, what's the result? And if not, why not? And what, if anything, have we learned from the past year and a half?
Yeah. So what do I think has happened? One, I think, I forget what they called it. I don't remember if it was the Ukrainian IT army, but you could almost think of it like another instantiation of hacktivism, like, WellSec or, Anonymous or, one of those kind of well-known hack, I think the BTS army is another one that comes to mind, right? You've heard of that. The BTS boy band actually has a substantial amount of followers that they can actually dox people. So like there's still this hacktivism component that I think is interesting. People are collaborating as a result of that, and they're learning. And, Ukraine and that whole entire region is interesting because, take, for example, Conti. Conti had ransomware people, affiliates and operators, parts of their back-end business that were both Ukrainian and Russian. And so, from a cybercrime perspective, there aren't really any innocents in that war. There are people on both sides of that conflict from a cybercrime perspective that are kind of quote unquote the bad guys. So I think regardless of whether they're using those skills to protect their nation from invasion or advance the agenda of the invading nation, they're learning things that they will ultimately use as tradecraft when they focus their energies more on their cybercrime initiatives. We're seeing a dramatic uptick in ransomware this year. It's I think projected to be the worst year for ransomware ever. I think we're seeing some of those tactics that were being used and learned. Those are informing ransomware affiliate tradecraft. I think that's number one. Number two, I think there's an ecosystem of tooling that is going to come out of this that you're going to find starting to get baked into, the malware kits that a lot of these groups tend to provide their affiliate networks. And I think we still haven't really seen this impact in the MSP and SMB space, but there has been an uptick in denial of service over the past year, DDoS and DDoS. And so I think until threat actors really figure out how to leverage that, kind of, for a lot of time we were talking about double extortion, but now it's, quadruple extortion. I'll steal your data, I'll ransomware you, I'll DDoS you, and I'll publish all your data to the press or to your customers or on a public leak site. There's endless amount of ways that they can extort customers. So they're learning skills on the battlefield that they're then ultimately going to be able to translate into tradecraft as they target organizations. So I don't think you're going to see a direct line, like because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there will clearly be a marked increase in DDoS and DOS against SMBs. But I do think what we're seeing, partially because of that conflict and also because of some of the success of some of the federal and international takedowns of some fairly well-known threat actors, we're seeing kind of some shifts in the business model. And even now we're seeing, ransomware operators potentially distance themselves from ransomware affiliates for fear of retribution by international governments. So I think there's a lot of factors that are going into like some shifts in how threat actors do what they do, that tradecraft. Again, the model I use for this with folks is attackers are like electrons. Anytime they find a path of least resistance, less resistance, or they need resistance, they're going to find an alternate path. The Russia-Ukraine conflict both increased resistance and decreased resistance, which means there's going to be a change in the state system that they fundamentally operate on. So at a base level, there will be change that comes from that conflict, but I don't personally see a direct line. But what we're gonna see is more capable adversaries as a result of this conflict, because now there's a gloves off theater in which they can practice their tradecraft with variably no ramifications. So people are going to get better, which is an unfortunate side effect, which just means we have to get better.
Final question, and it's one we ask all of our guests. Should there be a ban on ransom payments?
Man, we debated this one. I think it's a dangerous policy to ban ransom payments. I think if you get a business that has ostensibly done everything right, but the threat actor was so advanced, they literally wiped out all other available options for them to recover their business. You're essentially saying you don't have the freedom to continue to run your business. You must fail. You must close your doors. You must terminate your operations. I think that penalty is too extreme on the victim. And so, I think, maybe that policy works in the federal space and SLTTs where you say, okay, as a county, as a city, as a town, whatever, we're not going to pay ransom payments. We'll just leverage some, recovery fund that's available from the federal government to facilitate our recovery, and that might take longer and be more painful. But so I think it might make sense in certain industries. So I don't want to take it completely off the table, but I think a broad spectrum ban is not the right approach, because the people that wind up paying ultimately are the victims. And I don't think that that's right. Do I have a better solution? No, I don't. But I think anytime you're going to take away someone's last resort option to recover, that's a pretty extreme penalty to wield against them without having some other mechanism in place by which to support them to get back on their feet. And I think if you're gonna ban ransom payments, you can't do that without thinking about how you're going to support those people when they have no other options but to pay the ransom. And that we had a lot of conversations around that in the IST task force. And I think it's, there's a lot of people that land in different camps, but I think it's a nice talk track. It's something that's easy for people to rally behind because ransomware is bad. Why don't we just not pay the ransomware threat actor? That makes sense. But when you look at it a level deeper and you're like, wait, you're saying that the only way that someone could potentially get their data back, they can't do now? That doesn't seem right. So how do you reconcile something like that clearly could have a pretty substantial impact on deading an entire ecosystem of cybercrime? But again, attackers will adapt. You make ransomware payments illegal, they'll maybe they'll go back to money muling. Like, who knows, right? Like there will be innovations. I think it's what I refer to and is commonly known as a wicked problem. It's a problem that we have a social responsibility to try and tackle, but it is a problem that I don't think where there will ever be a clear solution to. So for a parallel, think about like homelessness, right? We will never completely solve homelessness. Maybe we will someday in the future, but it is a ostensibly wicked, hard, difficult problem. We have a responsibility to try and solve it and reduce its impacts on our fellow man. Ransomware is kind of the same thing, right? We have to figure out how to contain it, how to isolate it, how to manage it to its lowest level. But I don't think we can take on policies that create an excessive amount of collateral damage. So I have thought about this quite extensively, as you can tell, but regardless of how much I think about it, I don't think any individual person has the answer. That's why I think the initiative of the IST ransomware task force was important, because it was bringing a bunch of people together to think through problems from a lot of different angles. I think the collaboration is really where we're going to start to see some innovation come in attacking these problems. But I'm not a proponent of making it illegal to pay ransoms without some sort of other support for people where that is literally their last resort.
And with that, I'd like to thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. It's been a very interesting discussion, and your experience and insights have certainly given us a lot to think about. And we also thank our listeners for tuning in. To stay up to date on the latest in cybersecurity, be sure to subscribe to our podcast.